Hey there, Stanley.
Hello again, Mickey. Hi. Hi.
How you been?
Well, I was complaining that my walk was terrible yesterday, but we won't get into that. My head is okay, and I'm smiling because I'm glad to see you. And I'm also smiling because, for the benefit of the audience out there, that I'm very delighted to have heard our 7th episode about health and wellness, which I listened to yesterday, and I listened to it again this morning, even before I got out of bed. I think it's exceptionally good. So, bravo for us, if I'm allowed to say that.
Certainly, and all you out there have something to look forward to for episode 7. Well, I suppose if you're listening to this right now, you've already heard it. So I hope you liked it.
Today we're going to talk about books, poetry, stories, that sort of thing. It's a huge subject. I'm not quite sure whether we'll get through it all in one session.
I think we could talk about all of the world's books in 30 minutes.
Yeah, right. And poetry.
And poetry.
Including some of my own writing. So, interestingly, although I'm not a great poetry reader, I have a couple of poems from way back when I was a kid, and you have some poetry.
Yes, yeah.
Why don't we start with you?
Okay, well, before we begin, reading anything in particular, I would love to talk about sort of just what stories have meant to you in your life, how you got interested in reading and listening to stories, and then ultimately into writing them and turning it into a career, because not everybody reads and not everybody loves literature the way that you do, and the way that I do.
I have to confess that my love for reading came on the late side. My family, we were not great readers. We were not great book collectors. And I did the assignments that came in school, but they were not out of a great thirst for reading. That came really much later, in even maybe not much before college. And I'm sorry about that, because there were summers when I can remember not having anything to do in the hot Texas summer before air conditioning. And gosh, why didn't I just go to the library? And I did once in a while, but it was once in a great while. I didn't really appreciate reading until later. Now, I belong to, I don't think we've spoken about this, I belong to a gay men's book group, which I helped to found about 4 or 5 years ago with another fellow, and we meet and either in person or now on Zoom once a month and discuss a book that we have presumably read. But I'm interested in hearing about poetry.
Yeah, well, I was always interested in, I think people's interest in writing and reading really depends on who your English teacher is in high school. I was a little bit interested in middle school. I liked to write a lot. I loved movies, and my dad's an actor, so I was always watching movies and making little movies, and so writing little scripts when I was a kid. And writing scripts turned into writing stories, and then writing stories turned into writing poetry, because my dad and I are really into folk music, which is very lyric dependent. I like to listen to music that has profound lyrics that I gravitate toward, as opposed to the music itself. I more care about the words. And Harry Chapin, for example, Gordon Lightfoot, their writing was just so beautiful. So I was always interested in that. And then in high school, my English teacher, Timothy Hallowitz, he really made reading cool. He was the captain of the hockey team as well. Or not the captain, sorry, the coach for the hockey team.
That's an interesting dual job.
Yeah, he was the English teacher, and also he was the hockey coach and baseball coach, both of which I was on, both teams. And I really wanted Coach Hallowitz to like me. I wanted him to think that I was cool and be interested in talking to me. And so one of the ways that I decided to endeavor in that was to be very good at his class. And so I read anything he told us to read, and he had a really strange way of getting us interested in reading and writing, because he would make us listen to rap
Really?
as a form of lyricism and writing and making English cool. And we read some wonderful books in his class. House on Mango Street was a collection of vignettes that I thought was so cool. Song of Solomon was, a bunch of really cool books. And then after Mr. Hallowitz, I had just a number of phenomenal English teachers, and they were always the most inspiring teachers to me. So English became the thing that I was most interested in doing, and I was always interested in poetry because it's so imaginative, and you can say such concrete, tangible things in really lofty and almost unimaginable kinds of ways, really creative ways. And I liked metaphors and similes, and I liked turning outlandish concepts into a way to say I'm hurting or I love you, or So I liked reading poetry that way. And I
Are you going to read us some of your poetry? Some of
Sure,
your poetry?
yeah, I can read a couple. Let's Sorry guys, there was a phone ringing, so I paused it for a second, but I should have just let it keep running. We were talking about poetry, how interested I was in poetry in high school. And then you asked if I would read some of my own.
Yes.
I suppose I could right now.
Please do.
Okay. Let's see. Let me pull one up. Oh, I wrote a poem recently called From the 75th Floor, which is a poem about I was catering an event for some very wealthy person's penthouse home overlooking Central Park. So we were, all in their apartment. I was holding probably a tray of champagne or something and passing it around to guests. And I was looking out the window from this 75th floor penthouse, and all I could see was all of Central Park. It was like the most beautiful way to see the city. All of the tops of the skyscrapers, and then the sunset behind it. You could see over Manhattan. I've never seen the city from that perspective before. And I was thinking how lucky these wealthy people are to see the city like this. But these people don't know what the city's really like, because this is all they see. They get in there. They leave their doorman building, and they get into their private car that takes them to the fancy restaurant. Then they go into the fancy restaurant with their fancy friends, and they get back in their car. They come back to their doorman building and back to their penthouse. But they don't see the subways. They don't see the alleyways or the dirty parts of the city that the people who live in the city, really live in the city, know about. So I wrote this poem called From the 75th Floor. Here it is. It goes like this. This city, printed on postcards, a photograph mailed around the world, an envy collection, a corporate colored mountain range like blocks laid out in a playpen, and then the parents, coiling around us their accordion fence so that we never wander upward to see our home as they do, like it is in their postcards. From the 75th floor, the trees are toothpicks, aligned just so in accordance with the model that proposed their planting. Above the canopy, this forest, thick with vermin and shadowed corners, is an accent to the frames of a living room window, a painting of a landscape walked by no one so lucky as to view it from such a high, high window. And the palette is nice, is void of unpleasant schemes, void of alleyways, of people who live in alleyways, of the collapsing of veins, of the value of cardboard, of benches, of public restrooms, of steaming subway grates in winter. Oh, a beautiful place to live, that painting. Clean, marketable, a perfect portrait, manicured rooftops shaking hands with one another, each financed by the high floors as varnish on the city, because no one who can afford it wants to see beneath the postcards they like buying.
I like that a lot. Lovely images.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that poem.
When you do something like that, is it a one draft right through, or you do it and redo it, or what?
When I write from beginning to end. I'll write until I feel like it's finished, and then I will begin to edit loosely as I'm as I think things aren't quite right, and then I'll set it down, and then I'll probably readdress it the next day, and then maybe again a week later, and then again a week after that, and just from different perspectives. So like every time I write something, I find myself changing it or writing another version of it about a week or two later, and then keep doing that until, I mean, I've edited poems that I wrote 4 years ago, and I'm still editing them now.
Have you any attraction to writing other than poetry, like short stories or
I don't know.
essays?
I haven't really thought much about doing it. No, I like writing poetry because it's a fun way for me to get feelings out. Really.
I think it's great. Yeah.
How about you? Would you like to share something of yours? I know you've written
Yeah, I'm
8 books.
no, well, I'm glad to do it. I have no talent for writing poetry. I have minimum talent for reading poetry, but I will read for you and the rest of the guy of the world a quick essay from a recent book.
Wonderful.
Hold on one second, I get it. It's called What One Keeps, and I'll read it. A large regret from my time growing up is that I rarely sought the company of books. That omission was not the result of my dedication to sports or games. Aside from school assignments, opening a book just required an effort greater than I could muster. As an adult, that left me needing to do a lot of catching up. I did well in high school English classes, but I was drawn more to writing than reading. I wish I remembered more of the books that the dedicated and underpaid teachers assigned us. In college, there was naturally an abundance of required reading. It's hard to believe that I plowed through the Brothers Karamazov and years later reread it and didn't remember having done so before. It meant a lot more on the second visit. Aside from some tattered books from college and postgraduate years, for instance, King Lear with the passages marked that I thought I should know for a test, I've kept 2 books that I was given as a young boy, and through dozens of moves somehow managed not to lose. They are both books of poetry. The first is A Child's Garden of Verses by Robert Louis Stevenson, published in 1932, the year of my birth. My copy sits high on a shelf in my living room, its pages and binding slightly worn, but its large color illustrations as luminous as when the book was published. I take the book down and leaf through it, and almost without thinking I go to the poems I liked best as a boy. Quote, "When I was sick and lay abed, I had 2 pillows at my head, and all the toys beside me lay to keep me happy all the day." Quote, "I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me, and what can be the use of him is more than I can see." The other old book is When We Were Very Young of A. A. Milne, the 1935 new edition. Its small pages hardly commensurate to its fame and durability. The book is enhanced with delicate drawings by E. H. Shepard. There's an inscription in the side cover from Aunt Rose Keeper, my mother's lifelong friend in Houston, who lived to past age 100. According to her faded handwriting, Aunt Rose gave me that book in 1938 when I was 6, around the age of Christopher Robin Milne, to whom the book is dedicated. Aunt Rose was a cultured lady and probably didn't consult anyone in my family, and I'm glad she didn't, because they might have questioned the gift. It has endured, this book that deserves to know how it was and is loved. Milne's pages are blotted and stained. Their edges darkened, the ink and printing on the blue cover faded. If all the fingerprints that touched it were visible, they would make a dense painting. This book never got lost. I always knew where I could find it. I must have held the book close at hand because it's filled with scribblings and observations and my name and address, repeatedly written in the in the ragged handwriting of a boy. I penned my address in several places, and then in large letters added the new address to which we moved when I was 8. In determined letters I wrote, quote, "Please don't throw this away because it's poetry." Looking into the Milton book 70 plus years later, I smile to find how stubbornly the binding has hung on, given innumerable openings. I'm reminded of my role as critic at age 7 or 8, awarding grades to individual poems. They did not earn equal merit. To the side of the table of contents, I rated The Three Foxes very, very good. Politeness next to best. The Bear took the prize as best in the book. Those grades I assigned so long ago hold up as well today. At least partly by luck, I've kept the sweet but not sappy poems of Robert Louis Stevenson and A. Milne. They became occupants of my library before I had one. The A. Milne book has been reprinted in many editions, but I wouldn't trade my marked up copy for dozens of newer ones. It especially captures for me the time, quote, when we were very young, quote, and makes me yearn for those idealized days, a yearning I suspect I share with many others. Having so loved the world of Christopher Robin, I regret that more poetry for children, yet not childish, didn't come my way. Aunt Rose Keeper selected a gift she knew I should have, and if she were still alive, she'd be delighted to know I've kept it all these decades. I'm still catching up on the reading I didn't do long ago, and my bookshelves have a friendly, full look today. But little brings forth the feeling that comes when I re-embrace the charm of A. Milne and his illustrator. A bear, however hard he tries, grows tubby without exercise. Our teddy bear is short and fat, which is not to be wondered at. He gets what exercise he can by falling off the ottoman, but generally seems to lack the energy to clamber back.
Wow. It's wild how something from so young can still mean so much today.
You're so right, and I mean these these are poems from close to a century ago, and oh my gosh, I like them still.
That's so wonderful. I mean, this is Winnie the Pooh, correct?
The book is called When We Were Very Young.
When we were very young. So I read Winnie the Pooh books. I watched Winnie the Pooh when I was a kid, but the original stories I've never read. It's so cool. I can't believe you still have it.
I do. It's right up there on the shelf.
That's unbelievable. You write very well.
Thank you.
Do you think that writing, for as long as you have and as much as you have, has kept your mind very sharp?
Oh, no question. As I become physically more limited, we talked about this a little bit. I'm just so glad that the brain is still more or less intact. Yeah, and writing does that. But you know, the book group that I mentioned has been good too. It has obligated me to read a book, not always a book that I like that much, but a book every month. Books that, as my friend John, the leader of the book group, said, books that we very likely or possibly would not have read otherwise. But while we're talking about all of this, I would like to throw in a couple of books that have been favorites of mine along the way.
Yeah, please.
One is certainly Crime and Punishment of Dostoevsky.
One of mine as well.
Yours too?
Yeah, one of them.
Oh, I'm glad. I have to tell you that on my trip to Russia, when I stayed with a friend, we went to what was thought to be the building where the old lady lived,
No
who
way.
he murdered.
You gave it away, the story, from the first 50 pages
Yeah,
of the
that's
book.
right. Well, I guess everybody knew that.
Yeah, if you haven't read it yet,
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, you should read it. It's, yeah, I mean, this is, oh my
That's
gosh.
wild.
This is really where he plotted the story around this building. There's that. There's Death in Venice of Thomas Mann, a classic, of course. There is James Baldwin, we have read in the Gay Men's Book Group. He is one of my most favorite American writers, certainly, and deserves to be read by everybody. He will help break down any racist shards that remain in one's mind. He will help dispel those, I think. His
Wow.
writing is so very, very good.
What is the book that you read of his?
Another Country.
Another Country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How old were you when you read Crime and Punishment?
Recently, in the last maybe 10 years or so.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So, had you known when you had gone to Russia? Did you go to you didn't go to Russia within the last 10 years, right?
No, you're right. I bet the book must have been earlier.
Because you had read it before you went. Presumably.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
I read that book in high school.
Did you really?
Yeah, I read that book in my teacher, Mrs. Mahoney. She was my AP English teacher in high school, and we read that book in her class. And it changed my. I don't want to be so dramatic as to say it changed my life, but it certainly affected my life greatly at the time. And she had us do a really strange assignment where, after having read that book, she wanted us to understand the psyche of someone who is committing a crime, like committing a murder. I don't know if you'd be allowed to do this assignment anymore in school, but she had us we had to pick a person, a real person that we knew from our class, or I think it had to be someone from our class. Each of us had to pick one, and we had to write us murdering them the day before the murder, the commitment of the murder, and then the day after we'd done it, and go through the psychological sort of narrative of how we experienced that crime.
Do you remember who you picked?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, she's never gonna listen to this. I picked a girl named Bryn Seltzer, and I killed her.
Why?
I don't know. I at the time had a weird thing where I didn't like horse girls. Like people say like, oh, it's a horse. They're a horse girl, which is like any girl who's obsessed with horses. She had horses, like horse book covers and horse notebooks and stuff. She just really liked horses, and for some reason I didn't like that. I don't know. I was 16.
And you really wrote that?
I don't remember exactly what I wrote in the story, but I remember that's kind of why I chose her. I was like, oh, I'll kill Bryn because she has the horse notebook. But my friend had a really hard time writing that story. One of my closest friends in that class killed her boyfriend in her story by pushing him off of the reservoir, and it was one of the most beautifully romantic short stories I'd ever read, and I still to this day think about it regularly.
Wow.
Yeah. That book really affected me, Crime and Punishment.
Well, me too. For me, it started by the fact that Raskolnikov, the protagonist, is very young and handsome. That got me interested
That's
right
certainly
away.
enticing.
Yeah, that's exactly how he is described. And that whole opening sequence when he murders the woman, and by accident her sister, and then the police come and he has to hide in some corner of the building while they are inspecting the apartment, and he gets away with it.
Yeah.
To that point, it's so superbly written.
Yeah.
Well, we're putting in a plug for Dostoevsky.
Certainly. That book, James Joyce, was always one of my favorites. I have a quote from Portrait of the Artist as a young man tattooed on my foot.
Really?
Yeah, it says, her image had passed into his soul forever, and no word had broken the holy silence of his ecstasy.
Huh.
That's on my left foot. I got it for a girl that I was dating when I was 18.
I also, not so long ago, and many years too late, finally discovered Dickens,
Mm.
and I read David Copperfield just about the time that there was a new film made of it that is absolutely delightful, and so is the book. It is said that that was Dickens' favorite. Well, of course, it has a nice ending. You know, it's fun. And then I read Great Expectations, which I must say I liked less. Um, Pip is, I don't know, he's a bore.
What do you think that literature does for you and these stories that you still hold in your mind? What do you think that they've done for you? Have they changed your perspective on life? Have they affected the way that you interact with your relationships? Or do you think you just enjoy them for entertainment's sake?
I'm not sure how much they have affected me. It would be nice if I thought they had. How about you? Do you feel that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of the stories that I read when I was younger deeply affected the kind of person I wanted to be. I emulated a lot of the characters in the stories that I had read, and I wanted to be that way. James Joyce being one of them, because Stephen Dedalus in Portrait of the Artist as a young man is a boy who is struggling with his faith in a deeply religious Irish family, and he is not faithful, and he doesn't believe in God, and he's trying to figure out what faith is and what God is and what beauty is, and that at that time in my life that really resonated with me, and he did it with his writing. I just thought was so beautiful, and writing for me has always been a way for me to sift through the weeds of my thoughts and figure out what it is I really think and how I really feel. And I think reading does the same, but writing, the act of writing, is certainly the way that you do it, from the excerpt that you read, and I've read some of the other pieces that you've given me. I think that it gives you such a clear and vivid image of the experience that you're remembering when
Hmm.
you pick actual words to describe it. Now it's concrete in your head instead of this sort of fluffy, vague memory that you haven't really ever pinned down.
I would hope that some of my own writing is a bit of prose poetry. You know, it's not real poetry, but I hope that there's a sense of poetry
It feels that way.
sometimes in there. Yeah.
It feels like it's a reminiscing. I feel like I'm seeing you see your life.
Yes. I have tried my hand at fiction and not been very successful at it. I find that the books that I have published that are the better ones or the best ones are the nonfiction.
Mm.
That's where I am most comfortable, is with memoir, essay, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And why do you think that that's the case?
I don't know. There are people who are very gifted, goodness knows, at fiction. I'm not. I'm not. I've tried it, and I've done two or three novels. They're okay. They're not great. Listen, I want to bring up another thing to do with this overall subject, and it
Yeah.
is the fact that, before we run out of time,
We make
I,
our own time.
I have collected a lot of books, a great many art books, books that have been related to exhibits at the Metropolitan Museum, and books that haven't. Many of the most famous artists have been collected in books, and I have a lot of those. I must have maybe 100
Oh my gosh.
art books. They're valuable and they're heavy, and it has occurred to me to wonder what's going to happen to those books when I'm gone. And I don't know. I have a will. The will does not talk about books, but I have these, and occasionally it's on my mind to question this. Should I donate them to a school, to a library, to, I don't know. What do you have any thoughts? Because I'm not sure.
As to what you should do with them?
Yes.
We could burn them all. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I suppose you could donate them. I would say honestly, what you should probably do with them is donate them to to some inner city school, art school, or something related to that, because they certainly deserve to be shared. I don't know. I feel guilty often when I go past my bookshelf and I see books that I haven't touched in years that nobody's getting to read because I've imprisoned them in my shelf and I don't read them. But there is something to be said that, the book isn't yours. Certainly if you're gone, then whose is it?
It's something to think about. Where are we on time?
36 minutes.
Oh, goodbye.
Let's I would love perhaps to just read. So there's this podcaster whom I love. I've told you about him, Lex Friedman, and he ends every episode of his podcast with either a poem or a quote or something. And I figured, since we're talking about writing, I'd love to end with a poem by my favorite poet, perhaps my favorite American writer ever. His name's Stephen Crane. And he was from the late 1800s. He died in 1900 at only, I believe, 28 years old. But there's one poem. It's untitled, as far as I know. It's very short, and it's a love poem that I just think is absolutely beautiful. And it goes like this. Should the wide world roll away, leaving black terror, limitless night, nor God, nor man, nor place to stand, would be to me essential, if thou and thy white arms were there, and the fall to doom a long way. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in again this week, and Stanley, we'll do it again next week.
I certainly hope so. Bye, all.